Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. And in this time of should we be here or should we not be here, it's one of those ones, but it's great to see people in person without a screen around your face. It's fantastic. Good on you. My name's Simon Madden. I'll be on later, but I've got two roles. So, firstly, to do an acknowledgement of country. I live locally, so they've given me the role to be the local person to acknowledgement of country. So I would, in the spirit of reconciliation, I would like to begin by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people, the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather today, and pay my respects to the elders past and present, and the continuation of cultural, spiritual, and educational practices of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island people. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people here today. So, welcome everyone. Uh, Second part of my very simple job to start with is to introduce our uh, facilitator, leader, um, not master of ceremonies, because the language is a bit like that. So the leader of ceremonies, I'd like to say. Nikki Langman is a speaker, author, facilitator, and emotional intelligence and self-mastery expert. With more than 10 years of experience as a speaker, facilitator, and coach, Nikki is a go-to expert for enhancing personal effectiveness, understanding behaviour, transforming leadership, and communicating for maximum impact and influence. Nikki is an accredited practitioner of GENOS emotional intelligence programs, DISC Advanced Profile System, and Lego Serious Play methodology. She is also a competitive endurance runner and author of the book How to Be a Badass. She's navigating your road to self mastery. Would you welcome, please, to the stage, Nikki?
My friend. Good morning. Is this on? Shall I get? Good morning. That's better. That's better. How are you feeling this morning? Yeah? Right? Even better. Are you ready to be inspired, energized, and transformed? Are you ready to be inspired, energized, and transformed? That's better. Those of you that didn't say yes, you're in the wrong room. Thank you very much, Simon, for that wonderful introduction that I wrote. And I'm thrilled to be here this morning facilitating with you in person. How good is this to be in a room? All right. So as Simon said, my name is Nikki Langman. Now, I am an emotional intelligence or international author, speaker, and emotional intelligence expert. I'm also a competitive endurance runner in my spare time, what's left of that. I want to go through this morning with you just real quickly some housekeeping items. So if you need a fluid adjustment at any time that's in or out, please help yourself and use at your own discretion. We have fluid adjustment in here, and if you need fluid adjustment out, it's just down the hall to your left. The sign with the skirt, men, that's not for you. That's the ladies' room. Also, if you hear any beep, beep, whoop, whoop, I don't care how engaged you are, please leave the room. I believe there's elevators and lifts, and if there is, in fact, an emergency, please use the stairs. QR code sign-in, hopefully you all did this when you entered, but if you have forgotten, please do so before you leave. And as this event will be filmed, please let us know if there's any conflict that you have, or if there's anything you want to know about the filming or release, just speak to one of the staff members afterward. All right, all that good stuff out of the way. I want to share with you one of my favorite words. This word is currencia. For those high achievers in the room, this is how you spell it. Currencia is from the Spanish verb to want or to desire. Ascribed to bullfighting, currencia is the location within the ring that the bull will find intuitively to renew their strength. It doesn't show at once. It'll show as the fight goes on. The bull will find it. Is disoriented and losing his power, he will gravitate toward a certain location over and over. Now, the matador knows this and will be on the lookout for it, because if the matador lets the bull into his currencia, he is inestimably more dangerous and almost impossible to kill. So it's to the matador's advantage that he keeps the bull away from this place. Now, animals have intuitive currencia for survival. That's why they build caves, they construct burrows, they camouflage, they only hunt at night when they can't be seen, or they know to make haste toward a creek line when there is a fire. Humans have currencia too. Ours is just a little harder to spot though, because we don't spend enough time from here. We spend too much time up here. And we lose our connection to our authentic self, to our strength, to our place in the ring where we draw our true power. As you listen to the presentations today, I'd like to ask you that you think about the material and the presentations being given to you from 3 different perspectives. 1, the perspective of what do I need? Where's my currencia? 2, the perspective of what you need. Because if I can't understand what I need, I certainly can't assist you with what you need. And then finally, what do we need? So think of the 3rd place, however you choose to interpret it, as a similar concept to currencia, where you are at your strongest with the most strength, and the people around you, the community that you built, are inestimably harder to kill. Here's a lineup of our speakers: Dion Gosling, Martin Shepard, Tiffany Cherry, Simon Madden, you've already heard from him, and James Mans. And I'm very excited to turn this over to Mr. Simon Madden again for our first presentation of the day. Without any further ado, Simon Madden.
Thank you very much, Nikki. I'm back. Aren't you lucky? You thought you got rid of me. Again, welcome. Just so where I fit in, I'm not an architect. Some people might know my brother, Justin Madden, who was the planning minister for a while. He was also Commonwealth Games minister for a while when we had the Commonwealth Games in Melbourne. Apparently did a great job. People said to me a lot of times, they said, he's done a great job, your brother. I said, of course he did. They gave him $1.5 billion to run the Commonwealth Games. I reckon he got a good chance of succeeding. Anybody here got a budget of $1.5 billion to play with at the moment? No, so he did a very good job. So I'm not an architect. I deal in what I call sustainable high performance. I work with your people, how to get good and stay good. So it's about getting the most out of your people. I work with the individual, the team, the leadership, and the culture. And coming through COVID, it's been a really interesting time about what's that like afterwards. And I think part of the thing is that we're starting to talk about 3rd place. Because for a lot of people, the 1st and the 2nd place became the one thing at home. Excuse me, I've actually got out of my sick bed to come here. I've got a man flu. No, it's a bit more than man flu, but it's not COVID, so don't worry. I've actually been tested, so I can actually come and talk today. But our 3rd place has become really interesting because our 1st and 2nd place has actually become the same thing for a lot of people, or was for a long time. So what does our 3rd place look like? And I'm going to give you some interpretation from my background in my area of dealing with people. And I think the 3rd place post-COVID is going to become even more important because the way we look at our world has changed a lot. The way we look at how we live, how we work, where we live, where we work. And because we couldn't get to our 3rd place for a long time, whatever it was for us, we're really starting to look at what could that 3rd place be. And while we're here, this is a really interesting place to start with. So I'm going to talk about 3rd place, Moonee Valley Racecourse, and I'll give you a reason why I'm going to talk about that. Now, I'm also on the board of the Essendon Football Club. So if you're not don't back for Essendon, please just feel sorry for us. We're on the second last on the ladder at the moment, all right? So I was head of the Players Association, just from a football background, played a lot of sport, was head of the Players Association in a lot of change. I've been on other boards and I'm on the board of Essendon. So, and because we're in this place, I think that's a really good example to talk about how that's changing and why that's changing. Not from the playing point of view, but from the community point of view. So I'll talk about Windy Hill Precinct, which is the original place where I started playing football and is now part of the ownership of the Essendon Football Club still. I'll talk about the Essendon Football Club at Tullamarine, which is a whole new aspect of our existence over 150 years, where it's changed into and morphed into much more than just a football club. And I'd just like to touch on Marvel Stadium, about what that could be in the future, to give you an idea as far as a professional sports club, what that 3rd place could be. So if that's okay, we could go along with that. Is anybody against any of that? Does that make sense to you all? Thank you very much. And at any time, if you've got a question, I'll leave it to the end. No, if any time you've got a question, please ask. I'd really make sure that if I'm not giving the right information, then and you don't understand it, please ask a question. Okay. So Moonee Valley Racecourse, where we are. That's it. Lovely drone shot of where we are. Now, I'm really interested in this place as it evolves. And I'll tell you very simply, because that's the whole area is going to change over 10 years. So where we're standing in the what they call now the grandstand, part of the grandstand, is going to completely disappear. It's all going to be buildings. The grandstand is going to go down that side of the area. Down there is going to be the whole grandstand. It's going to change completely. And hopefully, we love artist impressionists. Part of it's going to look like that. It's going to look nice. It's going to have trees. It's going to have areas to move in, as well as offices, homes, etc. And I'm really interested. I have a personal interest in this because that is one of the areas they're selling, Thomas Street. Lovely new apartment they're talking about. I have a house 100 metres down the road. And hopefully my wife and I are going to downsize in that sometime in the future. So I am really interested in what's happening in this place because I'm a resident. So I'm really interested to see what's happening. And I think that's really important. And we have a lot of information. And I was saying before, there's still a lot of talk about what they can and can't do and how big the building's going to be and how many residents they can have and what type of resident and how many streets are going to be here and what type of restaurant or cafe or open area or garden they're going to have. And they've been very good because if you've come in from there, you'll see that there's end up being a soccer pitch in there maybe, a few other things. They're still working about it. But they're very good sales so far because out the front, the first thing they've put in is they've put in a nice garden and a nice lawn, make it feeling very friendly. So far, they're selling it to me very well at the moment. They're doing a great job. But I'm really interested to see how this evolves because I'm not sure, but I think I'm older than most people in this room. I know I've had the grey put in to make myself look older because people don't believe I'm this old. And you're allowed to smile. If you think it's funny, it's okay. But I'm really interested because I'm going to spend hopefully the next 30 years of my life, or 25 of them maybe, to actually be in this area. So I'm really interested to see. So I'm really interested in the third place there. Which leads me to my involvement with the Essendon Football Club as a local. Now, the Wind Hill precinct is in the middle of Essendon up near it. If you don't know there, it's up near Essendon Station. It's where Essendon played their football, VFL and before it came AFL for a lot of years. And that's about the area there. That's a nice little plan of where just come out off the website with all the trees are. Now that's really nice because we've moved from there. And people see it as a football club. But it has a bit more. That's what people remember it. A lot of football being there. That's halftime, people having a kick, which is great. Always part of how do we get out there and what do we do when the footballers aren't playing. And of course, Moonee Valley's asked a lot of residents for their vision on what it's going to be, which is good and bad because they want the locals to be involved, but we're going to have lots of choices. And sometimes you have too many choices, you don't know what to pick. But they're asking for the locals to have a look at it. But Essendon was originally the home of the Bombers, the Essendon Football Club. They're still involved. But also, it's the home of the Essendon Cricket Club. It's the home of the Essendon Bowls Club. The Essendon District Football League play their games there. And it's right on the corner is the Essendon Croquet Club, which has got its own little title. So for all the architects and designers there, it makes it really interesting for what you're going to do next. But also there's other things there as well. So it's more than just a sports place. Of course, like any sports place, you have Windy Hill, the venue. There's a whole lot happens there. We also have poker machines at the moment, which is a whole argument about should we keep them or should we not? What should we do with them? Should we go? What should we do with as far as the benefit to the members of having them or not having them? Because we represent the members. We also have on the corner the Wind Hill Fitness Centre, which is like everybody else has closed along the way. So you see there's a whole lot of things just for starters before we even go into what that third place could be. There's already lots of parts of the third place. And then the extension of that, and I'll come back to both of those, the extension of that is now we've moved up to Tullamarine. So as a professional football club, sporting club, we've made a big move to go because that was in the middle of a residential area and there's very little room for expansion. Now we're up on airport ground and we've got that. Now that, and that's NSC Hanger. You always look after sponsors, NSC Hanger. That cost us about 24 million, I think. and we are just extending it now in the middle of COVID. That was a really good idea to do, to spend $21 million extending it to make it a really, really world-class venue. Inside it's called a hangar because it looks a bit like that. It's got a sprung floor with a whole lot of grass, plastic, rubber grass if you can have, and it's sprung so it can run around on. It's about 80 metres by 50 metres. It can actually fit a jumbo jet in there, I think, so it's called a hangar. And we have this vision of it. Artist's interpretation is beautiful. It looks really good again, all the trees. Funny how the trees you put straight in become 20-year-old trees as soon as you put them in. It's beautiful, isn't it? But that's the vision of what it's going to be. It's going to be more than a football club. And why? Because, yes, the AFL is involved in it. We're an AFL side. Also, we have a VFL side, men's side, so that's an involvement. We also, it is the home of the Paralympics Australia because they didn't have a home in Australia. So part of the deal with the government is to actually have them that's their centre up there, which has been really good. They play rugby and basketball on the basketball. If you've ever seen Paralympic rugby, those blokes are crazy. It's fantastic. And think about this. You think about because some of them, most of them can't feel from the waist down. After they played and they run into each other, they actually have things checked to make sure they're not broken because they can't feel them. They are seriously crazy people. It's fantastic. It's a fantastic game. We also have just started with the VFL women's side, which changes everything for us. It's fantastic. I have 2 daughters, 2 sons. So hopefully they have the equal opportunities we go forward. And we have a VFL women's side. And so part of that expansion is how do we fit that in with proper change rooms for them? They don't need to worry about sharing it with men. You can actually have it, a really good, classy place for them to go and store their belongings and look after themselves, etc., before and after games. We also are building a Hall of Fame. We had a Hall of Fame, but we're reconstructing it. You think about what that means, all the memorabilia, all the history. How do we connect that with the present? We're putting that in. We're also doing a Indigenous Hall of Fame to go along with that. Now, if you don't know Michael Long there, and it's a statue of him outside the club at the moment, he was the first AFL footballer to put his hand up and say, no, I'm not taking the racism anymore. Great friend of mine. I have a great regard for Michael because he gave me an education about Indigenous culture and history that I never got at school. And I just thank him very much for that. But he's a great representative of what we're doing there. We're also going to have that AFL women's side. We're really chasing one. We think it's much better for us and our community, our sports club to have that. And we put in submission 2 years ago, and we didn't get it. Okay, so we didn't get it. But we're going to have another guy because I promised 2 clubs to other people already. So we're going to get next year. We think we've got a really good submission. And just a little add to it, because where you have to start to think more is a few years ago we started the Purple Bombers, which is the LGBTQIA plus group, because we had people come to us saying, we don't feel safe going to the football. Now, in the modern world, that is terrible. Now, I'm director of football club. Nobody should go to a sporting group and feel like they're unwelcome or fear for their safety or fear about being abused. So we started the LGBTQIA group called the Purple Bombers. And remember, because everybody wants to be valued and we want to value everybody who wants to be part of our club. So that's just a touch of what a football club is starting to become, or what a sports club is going to become. And all those things, and still evolving. I said, I'm not an expert on what the third place is, but you start to see what it could be, or how it could be. And the third place is not just physical. It's about the environment, but it is part of that environment, me dealing with people and groups and companies, is do you give them the best opportunity to be their best? That also means do you give them the surrounds, the environment, physical as well as cultural, to give them the best opportunity to be their best. That's what we're looking at. So for me, what does that mean? Oh, sorry, I had to touch on Marvel. Just quickly on Marvel. I'm probably gone over my time. Sorry, Annie. And he's really big on keeping me on time because I talk in 30-minute lots. And if you miss me on 31 minutes, you've got to listen to the next 29. Marvel Stadium. Now, think about this. It's a whole new, AFL have bought it. It's going to be bigger and better, they say. Think about this. It's an inward-facing stadium. I remember someone, it's an inward-facing stadium. I went, yeah, because you face inwards and you watch the game. They said it's got to be more than that. What about the outward-facing aspect of it? Because you want people are going to be there. And I've seen sport in England. I've seen sport in America, NFL America. Remember, NFL football goes for 4 15-minute quarters. Is on telly for 3.5 hours, and they're actually the play time is 11 minutes and 15 seconds actual play time. So what else do you do there? There's a whole lot of other things. So they want that to be outward facing as well, meaning if you got off the train at Spencer Street Stadium and walked to the ground, you should be involved in 7, 8, 9 different activities, involvements, activations, they call them. There's got to be more than just a sports game itself. Now, that takes on a whole lot of other areas about what does that mean for the third place. So out of all that, for me, what's the third place going to be? Well, I think, and again, it's Graham said I'm not an expert, but I think as a member of a board that's got to make big decisions about a group that's involved in the community, third place is about the community. It's about inclusion. It's about diversity. And you've got to be sure you've got both of those, because you can talk about diversity and not have inclusion. You can have inclusion and not have diversity. There's two aspects of that. So you've got to have that in it. It's got to be about safety. It's got to be about education. It's got to be about entertainment. It's got to be about connection. It's got to be about history. It's got to be about health. A whole lot of things. Do we start putting medical centres in our places as well for the community? Of course, it's about well-being. It's about relaxation. And it's, of course, about multi-purpose. So there's my idea of, from a sports point of view, from a professional sports point of view, and a person dealing with getting people to be better, what that third place could be, or what maybe it should be. So that's my idea of third place, and I think I've taken my time, and thank you very much.
Simon, before you rush off real quick, have you back up here for a minute? Yeah. We liked you so much. We don't want you to leave. Before we bring on our... Is this on?
There you go.
There you go. Before we bring on our next speaker, does anyone have any questions for Simon?
Don't ask if we're going to win the premiership this year, all right? That's not those footy questions. All straightforward. Yes. What's your name? Madison.
And the meeting place, thank you. The meeting places around that stadium. I just wanted to know, with the other redevelopments that you mentioned, including Moonee Valley, if there's a focus on turning the stadium inside out as well, to sort of focus on the public spaces around the stadium to increase interaction.
A very good point. Yes, the easier answer is yes. Okay, I'll elaborate. I think people, especially, as I said, I've started to look at this because I live in the area. You just have to have that. That public space should become. Now, think of anybody live or been down to the Docklands. With all good intention, is one of the windiest places. Forget about Windy Hill. It's one of the windiest places in the world. Put up all these buildings, didn't put enough trees in, didn't think, and there's just, now it's potentially a great place, and they're working really on it. But how do you get the public place to be really public? Do you have a public place, everybody goes inside because it's too windy, or it's too rainy, or there's not enough cover on it, etc. So I think more and more places are looking at, and we're definitely looking at, we have to look at, say somebody comes to visit training, so is it inviting? We've changed the entrance to make it a bit grander and a bit more inviting. I'll always go through the shop on the way out. That's what you do. And there's got to be, people want to buy stuff. There's a cafe, really cool cafe. There's the area where you're going to go through all the Hall of Fame. There's areas where you can have functions, etc., etc. So the public spaces are becoming intrinsic to any development. And I think if you looked at some of the maps for here, that they really have to think about it. And we're dealing with the council with Windy Hill because there's so many aspects to it. That what is the public place going to look like? I don't know if anybody's been to Victoria Park in Collingwood, where used to be a VFL ground. It was all fenced off. They've made it a public open space where you can access it. They've got a little bit of history connected to it. It's one of the old scoreboards, and this open space where people can bring their dogs and walk them. They can run around it. There's still a social club. There's still other sports using it, but it really is about opening up that public space and making that public space really usable to a whole lot of groups. When my brother was sports minister, I always remember talking to him, and he was planning minister and sports minister, but then they combined sort of his concept. He said, if somebody comes to a country sporting, say a country football club, says, we want $10 million to do a new stadium, involve a stadium, and he goes, who's it going to be for? And he said, and they say, well, it's the footy club. They'll go, no, because that's too much money for one group. But if they came to him and said, well, it's for the footy club and the netball club, and then there's going to be an area for the baseball club to be involved, and there's going to be aspects of this, and this, and so the greater community, instead of this much of the community being involved, this much of the community is going to be involved. all of a sudden he goes, yeah, that's what I can see the use of that. So that concept of what's the best use of what we've got there, and you'll hear some. I've just looked at some of the presentation, some of the innovative and strange and wonderful ways we can achieve that. It's going to be very interesting. So there's a long answer to a short question. I said I could have just said yes. Okay. Thank you. All right.
Any other questions for Simon?
Going, going, going. Gone. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. All right, I'd like to announce our next speaker. If you don't mind, I'm going to read this a bit because I don't know her bio by heart, but we have Tiffany Cherry coming up next. And Tiffany is one of Australia's leading sports presenters and producers with a media career spanning over 25 years and 3 continents across television, film, radio, print, and digital media. An active board member with SEA Sports Environment and Alliance and inaugural chair, Richmond Football Club Environmental Action Committee, Tiffany is also a former member of Richmond's Diversity and Inclusion Action Plan Committee and Essendon Football Club's Gender Diversity Committee. Tiffany is also our Watch Ambassador, shining a light on gender inequality, which often leads to violence against women and children, plus ambassador for the Royal Flying Doctors. Will you please give me a hand to welcome Tiffany Cherry?
Thank you so much, Nikki, and thank you to all of you for your interest and coming here. Obviously, your valuable time. Thank you to Dion and to 106 Architects for inviting me to come up and speak. And I also too pay my respect to the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather here today, their elders past, present, and emerging, and to any other Indigenous people who are present with us today. So I'm also not an architect. I'll come to that in a moment, but I think Simon and I are just part of the warm-up to the architect. So just to give you a bit of a brief on that. And I think Simon played himself down a little bit. He's got a lot of dad jokes, but just so I don't know if some of you who don't maybe know football too much, he's a 2-time premiership player, 3-time All-Australian, 4-time best and fairest, captain of Essendon Football Club, part of their team of the century, and in AFL Hall of Fame. So I think he deserves a bit of a round of applause for his previous achievements, as well as obviously just a great presentation. So from my background, all right, so as I said, I'm not an architect. I have a passion for architecture. I remember as a little kid driving around a lot with my mum, and I used to drive past houses, would be going to friends' places. That sort of became routine in my head. And I remember looking at specific houses and imagining how I would do them up. But I didn't go into architecture. I went into physiotherapy because I loved sport, and I had I think I had a foot injury when I was in year 12, and I was doing a lot of sport at school. And I remember going with my $40, which was a lot of money back when I was in year 12, and in 1989. And I used to see all these famous sports people coming in and out of the obviously the consultation rooms, and I was like, wow, you get paid a lot of money to meet all your sports fans. So I decided to go into physiotherapy. And then a few years later, I'd never ever seen a female sports journalist on television. And I remember watching one on TV on Sports World, and I had an epiphany, and I thought that's what I want to do. And so I moved. I gave physiotherapy away after having my own business, and I moved into media and just did a sort of a whole 3 years of having 10 jobs at one stage. 5 were paid, 5 weren't, trying to break in because it was all about I couldn't get a job because I didn't play the sport. So as you know, football mostly. What would you know? You didn't play the game. As you heard, Nikki just said, I do a lot with gender equality. That was a part of that, was the driving force. My dream was to go to the Olympics as an athlete. I wasn't good enough. And so one day I made this audacious statement that I was going to host it, not having any concept of what that meant. 17 years later, I achieved that dream and hosted the Winter Olympics, and then I hosted the Commonwealth Games, and then the London Olympics, which was sort of the piece de resistance. And then I quit. I was physically, mentally, emotionally, every kind of concept of being burnt out. And I think I was over 40, and I was like, I don't even have a family. It's the whole concept of that. So I sort of took some time out and then peeled back all the layers of what I actually was, which essentially is a storyteller, but I love innovation, problem solving, and then started to really develop a passion for our environment. Of course, sport has been part of me since I was little. having an older brother, and gender equality, as I obviously touched on. So today, during COVID, I launched my own with a business partner, Cherry Pick Productions, creating video content, MC, podcasts, etc. Basically, just doing creating a portal for what I already was doing. But after, I'll come to a previous job that I was with, which is at Richmond. So I'll sort of give you a bit of another view of what Simon was talking about as well from another football club. But I then moved into head of marketing and media for an education platform. I never thought I'd move into education, but it's a literacy program based out of Sweden. It's got nothing to do with architecture, but it's pretty amazing. So if anyone's interested in that, come and chat to me later. But in terms of my architectural experience, I design and project, manage my own home renovation. I was saying to a friend of mine here earlier that there's a few little hiccups along the way, and some things I look at and I thought, oh God, I didn't do that well. But essentially, it is part of what I love. And then I also put together my daughter's cubby house, and she painted it the other day, as you can see, with her friend. So that's pretty much it. But in terms of the relevance of why I'm speaking, so as I said, I started to develop a real passion for our environment. So I finished up in full-time media in 2012. I then did a number of bits and pieces, but in that period of 2013, 14, I became pregnant with my daughter, and then I had her in 15. And I then decided I thought I had a lot of spare time on my hands as a single mum. So I decided to do an MBA while I was breastfeeding my daughter, just because I thought I had spare time. And I also did the board of directors course, which was amazing. And the MBA was in innovation and leadership, and it was fantastic. And so was the board of directors course. I finished that, and then I was like, well, I want to get on a board. So it's not as easy as obviously just putting your hand up. And I spoke to a guy called Malcolm Speed, who's a very experienced board member. He's a former head of the ICC, International Cricket Councils, on the board of Richmond and numerous other boards. And he said, look, we've got this, what do you know about the environment? Or, are you interested? And I said, yeah, I love things environmental, but not really much. And he said, well, you'll do. We need someone with media experience. So it was a startup, and it's a Sports Environment Alliance. So it's bringing the sporting sector, whether you're a sports person or a club or an organisation, to be really managing your own playing fields. And so it's a not-for-profit providing environmental leadership and advocacy. I highly recommend. It's very cheap to join. Highly recommend that you look into it. You don't have to be a sports club to be part of it. We've got councils involved, we've got schools, etc. So it really, the advocacy is fabulous. There's 3 alliances worldwide. One is at Lords in London, and one is in North America in Atlanta, and the other one is with us here in Melbourne. Little moniker is No Planet, No Play, pretty easy to understand. We've just hit 50 members. Chatham House Rules, one that we're just about to announce, which is the Australian Olympic Council, which is great, ahead of obviously the Tokyo Olympics has just joined up. And they did a study just before COVID, looking at where really environmentally, where we could have the most impact. And while Essendon's one of our members, and we've got the AFL, and we've got Australian cricket, and we've got the FFA, and we've got numerous Tennis Australia, numerous big organisations. Really, a lot of the gains are at grassroots, where the biggest, where they can be made. And there's a lot of opportunity here for you guys in terms of there's so many grants, etc., around through councils, through the government, and and with women coming through. I'm sure a lot of you know this, but just to reinforce it. There's sporting facilities need to be redesigned, as Simon touched on, to make it not an adjunct for women to be a part of it, but to make them as equal and as valued as their counterparts who have historically been there before them. So there's the redesigning of a lot of these sporting facilities, and Richmond was one of them, as a lot of the football clubs do go through this over about probably a 15, 20-year period, Simon would say, where they sort of do redevelopments. So I was offered a job at Richmond. I went for a job at Essendon, and I was on the committee, and I didn't get it. I told Simon this the other day. So then I was offered a job at Richmond, and then I had to obviously quickly stand off the Essendon committee. I was in Essendon. I follow Essendon. So anyway, I returned in 2017. Well, lo and behold, we win 3 flags. And I was previously their physio back in, just to rub it in, back in 1995, 6, 7. And so I won a flag in 97. So now I've got 4 flags for my name. So that's more than you, double you, Simon. So there you go. Anyway, and I was asked to come on board and to manage a campaign that probably some of you would have heard called This Girl Can Victoria. It started in 2017, and it was a 3-year contract that Richmond was awarded as one of the profile clubs or profile organisations. Western Bulldogs as well were, but then they went out to a whole variety of sports. But Richmond was the biggest, just given obviously our membership, which is over 100,000. So it was $500,000 budget, and I had to cut. They basically, Richmond just said to me, "You just manage this for us." Whatever you're doing and however you want to. So we'd put in for a license for the AFLW, and we were awarded that later in 2017. And so this sort of gave me a lot of ideas, which I'll come to in a moment. But I also joined the Diversity Inclusion Action Plan, and as Nikki said, the founder and inaugural chair of Richmond's REACT, which is Richmond's Environment Action Team. So before I move on to the next one, that was an interesting one. So I'm on the board of C. Our chair of C is on the board of Richmond, and Richmond wasn't a member of C. And I kept saying to Malcolm Speed, is Richmond? Why are we not? And he said, I can't get them to do it. And then I went and spoke to my boss, and he said, well, look, we've already got all these pillars. We do the Alana Madeline Foundation, which is fantastic. We do our Indigenous, the Coram Gamaji Institute, which is great. And we had, a few others, and the WWF, which is the World Wildlife Foundation. But it's probably we've got too many. And so the West Coast Eagles were a member, and they were redeveloping Amy Stadium, and they've done an amazing job with their waste management. It is world class and incredible. And so I wrote an email to Brendan Gale, call him Benny. The reason why was because I was his physio back in 95, 6, 7. So I've written this email, but quite well aware that, there's a connotation of being a bit of a greenie. That's sort of not really now, but back in 2017, it was a bit like women in 2015 and maybe Indigenous in, 2005, 6, 7. So it was not really sort of mainstream to be pushing that agenda. And I didn't hear back from him, and I didn't approach him until later that year. We were sitting at a This Girl Can Victoria sort of final assembly, and they had a welcome to country by one of the Wurundjeri Indigenous elders. And Brendan and I actually happened to arrive just slightly late, walked in together, so we sat down together, and I could feel him getting really engaged in this quite extended sort of a welcome to country. So at the end of the whole presentation, I turned to him and I said, that was fabulous, wasn't he? He said, yeah, I love it. And I said, I just want to revert back to an email I sent you. And I thought, here's my opportunity, to an email I sent you with regards to joining the Sports Environment Alliance. He said, oh yeah, I remember receiving that. I didn't know how to respond. And I said, that's okay. I'm not having a crack at you. I just wanted to relate it to what we've just done. So we're all about, Richmond's about obviously winning premierships and football, but we're all about community. It's well documented. Not we anymore because I'm not part of them, but they beat their chests a lot about what they do in the community, and they do a lot in the Indigenous space. And I said, but really, we help the Indigenous community with the people, but pardon what I'm going to say, but we crap all over the land and the airs and the waterways and everything else which is half of being Indigenous is all about. It's about, their totem. We have the eagle in the Wurundjeri community, the Yorta Yorta. And I said, this is just, we're talking the talk, we're not walking it. And he looked at me and he said, I've got absolutely no rebuttal. You're absolutely right. We're signing up. So we signed them up straight away, and off we went. And I started up the Richmond Environmental Action Committee. We are undergoing, Richmond is undergoing renovations and a whole revamp of Punt Road, and they hadn't chosen an architect by then. They may have now, so if any of you are thinking. But I kept pushing, and I don't know what they're doing now, but I kept pushing that they really look at it from an environmental perspective. And the reason being, so we had our head of finance at Richmond, and he was as most heads of finance, if anyone in here is an accountant. Anyway, he counted his pennies very closely. And even the membership, he was like, but obviously Brendan said sign up. And I said, when I had a chat with him and I said, look, we will save money. And he said, well, yeah, well, I'm open to having a look at it. So with me, with really not much experience at all, I just then went about and, pardon the pun, cherry picked a whole lot of the low hanging fruit of what we could change. And I started with just changing the mindset of our team of about 120 people, including the players. We all given, one of our partners was, I don't know who the sponsor was, and they all gave us a keep cup. And I noticed that probably 20% of the all of the people, we had a barista every day coming along, would use their keep cup, but everyone else would just get a takeaway cup. And so I went to the barista and I said, how much does it cost for a cup? And he said, oh, 5 cents. I went, oh, that blows that concept out of the water. And he said, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I thought it'd be about 50 cents. I want to give a saving of 50 cents to every person who brings their keep cup. And he said, I'll do it for you. So cut a long story short, I then presented to the club and encouraged everyone. I pulled out a $100 note and I said, this is what you're going to save if you use your keep cup. By the end of it, we got, including Damien Hardwick. So he kept dodging me because he kept forgetting his keep cup until one day he shoved it in my face. He said, there you go, I've got your keep cup. And I said, that's brilliant, give me a hug. So we're hugging in front of everyone. I was like, there you go. No, I'm not the girl, by the way. Anyway, we were hugging and it was in public. And I said, see, I want everyone to see that you're bringing your keep cup because you're a leader. And he said, no, I get it. I then signed Richmond up. This is where it went to board level. And I had a few people tap me on the back and go, this is amazing. And Brendan was like, that was really easy. And he of course, the CEO, he just went, oh, I took all the glory, but I'd done all the hard work in the background. So I signed Richmond up to the United Nations. We became the 4th Australian body organisation to sign up to the UNFCCC, well, the Sports for Climate Action. It is one of the pillars, I suppose, of the United Nations. So Bowls Australia, amazingly, was grey power. So we talk about millennials and Gen Zs that's driving the campaign of and the agenda of environment, but Bowls Australia was the first to sign up. Then actually, I think it was the Tennis Australia. They did a big hoo-ha and said they were the first, but they weren't. It was Bowls Australia. And then the MCC, and they are amazing. The MCC recycles, I think now they're up to over 80% of all of their waste. They have this big mulcher where they throw so much into it. And I'm talking a huge amount of all their food and a whole lot of other things. And they put half sand, or 1 thing sand and 2 things of soil. And it comes out with as a mulch, and they put it over all of the MCG and all of the MCC parklands, and then they give it to the local schools and communities and elderly homes. It's incredible what they do. So we signed up, and then we did a LinkedIn story. And obviously this is Richmond. This was in 2018. Richmond had won the premiership in 2017. We had 100,000 members. And the LinkedIn story that we did was the 2nd highest liked, viewed, whatever it was, impressions that we had for that year on year, which was incredible. So that's what obviously our fan base was saying, hey, this is pretty amazing. Obviously LinkedIn is at a higher level, more educated, people are more in business, but that's what they were liking that. So the Sports for Climate Action commit to 5 principles. So undertake systematic efforts to promote greater environmental responsibility. So from ad hoc to strategic. So a lot of organisations doing ad hoc. Let's just make it now more strategic. Reduce overall climate impacts, which is obviously making it climate neutrality, or to sequester climate is the next step. Educate for climate action, so knowledge sharing. So this is again all part of what C was doing. Promote sustainable and responsible consumption. And advocate for climate action through communication. Obviously, getting Richmond on board and getting all these big clubs is great because that we can use those platforms. And how it comes back to that 3rd place and opportunities for you guys in terms of, again, the redevelopments of not just the big ones, but the grassroots. These people have big platforms through all their members, etc., where they can promote. And there's no reason why they can't apply. It doesn't have to be a big organisation that can become part of the Sports for Climate Action group under the United Nations. There are opportunities for everyone if you can tick, or not just tick, but embody these 5 principles. So the United Nations, back in 2015, the Paris Agreement, which I'll talk to you about in a second, but they created 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Who knows the SDGs? Couple? I've only seen a couple of hands. Okay, so I highly recommend that you just look up United Nations SDGs. I got to be careful when I say that. Yeah, anyway, I won't. But so number 3 is good health and well-being. Clean, you can see it here, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy. These all relate to the stuff that you guys can do. Sustainable cities and communities is you. Responsible consumption and production. And number 13 is climate action. So they came out of the Paris Agreement of 2015. Who's heard of the Paris Agreement? Good, that's great. So the goal is to limit global warming. We need to hear more about this below 2 degrees Celsius, preferably 1.5 compared to pre-industrial levels of 1850 to 1900. So then the Sports for Climate Action was developed out of that. The sports impact on our climate through construction, travel, energy, water use, catering, etc., is considerable. And sports global interest for billions of fans and media coverage is a powerful platform to advocate for positive action. So again, you can go to these organisations and say, well, let's look at it from an environmental perspective. Let's get you joined up to the Sports for Climate Action group, or have that as a goal. And then you can make, obviously, a big impact. And why? So why do you want to do this? And why Australia versus the world? Well, Australia's commitment is significantly insufficient, tracking to nearly 3 degrees increase by 2050. Per capita, we're tracking to contribute, so this is per head, obviously, more than 15% of our global emissions by 2030, which is an absolute disgrace. In 2017, we lost more than half the Great Barrier Reef. So if you just think about that, half of it is gone. I think it's something that's like 1 billion species. So we lost 500 million species because of global warming. So basically the waters, there's more water mass than there is land mass. So when the earth is heated up, obviously the water heats up, conduction. And then when it gets too warm, it's too acidic. And so the organisms or the life dies. A further 2 degrees. So we're tracking at 3 degrees. So a further 2 degrees and most of the Great Barrier Reef will die, gone. Now, just the most recently, we've had the bushfires, catastrophic. They've said they're the worst bushfires New South Wales has ever had, and we've just had a once-in-a-century flood. So catastrophes have happened throughout the ages. Just now, since really 2015, we're seeing that they're happening like on steroids. So they're happening so much more regularly, and they're happening at a level, as you see here, the worst and once-in-a-century flood at high levels. And they're going to keep continuing because as the ice caps melt, what happens is there's a whole lot of gases under there. So so they're being kept in, but once the ice caps melt, those gases are released, and then they expedite the warming because they contribute to global warming. So then it just becomes self-perpetuating, and that's why the temperatures are rising so quickly. So 2015, we said that we would reduce our greenhouse emissions by 28% below those 2005 levels by 2030. Post-COVID, though, the national government's initiating a gas-led recovery. Now, I know there's a lot of other factors involved in this, but we really need to be pushing our environmental component. But there is hope. All the states and territories have adopted a net zero target by 2050. So on a state level, there is a lot of help. So again, bringing it back to what's related to the sporting sector, well, millennials and Gen Zs. Simon, these are the next fans or the current fans. These are the ones that the clubs want to capture because they're the ones that obviously they're going to continue over the next 40, 50 years. A Gallup poll collects data in over 160 countries. They found in 2019 the millennial and Gen Zs are worth $1 trillion in consumer spending, and their concern for global warming is at an all-time high. In fact, it is in Australia the number one concern that they have. Number 2 is mental health, but they're intrinsically linked, and that comes back to the third space. So social media is the second biggest concern, mental health. Post-COVID, we're suffering from a global epidemic, though, of loneliness. Social media is a surrogate for friendship, and I've stolen that from Kira Ashetron, Stop Being Lonely. Good book. So millennials and Gen Zs, they're demanding a CSR programs around environmental sustainability. Millennials want to find meaning where they work and where they shop, but it must be authentic. So obviously buildings, third place, is a brilliant start. So going back to the concepts that we're all talking about, we've spoken about what it is, authentic connection, really wanting to and the need to feel valued. How can we create this place with our environment at the fore is obviously what I want to leave you with. And there, as I said at the beginning, there's great opportunities through grants and funding. So a few takeaways. The generation of now and tomorrow demand we do better. It's not about what we want, it's about really what they want moving forward in the legacy. Being environmentally savvy, as I showed you with Richmond. Oh, sorry, I didn't actually say that. Going back, it was up on my slide. So the head of finance. So I ended up saving Richmond through all the low-hanging fruit that I did, all the changes. I saved them $200,000 in 6 months, so pre-COVID. So that was year-on-year saving. So it's over a 12-month period. But in 6 months, I managed to save the club $200,000, and I didn't have a background in what I was really doing. It was just common sense. And half of that, though, was changing our energy provider, but still, might as well as a quick win. Highly encourage you to have a look into that. But $100,000 was simply getting rid of coffee cup, getting rid of plastic cups, getting rid of the water fountains, using the humble tap, and getting rid of, looking at our sorry, I've just got a mental blank, looking at our uniforms and doing a stock take. And we used to every year get brand new uniforms. It was just crazy what we're doing, getting rid of plastic bags in the membership shop, etc. So there's great opportunities. The third place is the social connection. Highly, though, push that you are authentic for the millennials and the Gen Zs. And that's it. Thank you so much. Any questions? I'll do that for you, Nikki. Anyone have any questions for Tiffany? Oh, I did very well.
Thank you very much, Tiffany. That was really inspiring, and I think I took a lot of away from that, being a woman and having children myself. So looking at it from the lens of, what does my future look like in the future that I am bringing for my children. So, okay, our next presenter. Let me just get this. There we go, Mr. Dion Gosling. So the architect for 106. Let's see right here. There he is. So Dion is a leading architect for sports, community, and recreation facilities. As a former NZ hockey black stick Olympian and New Zealand's Commonwealth Games silver medalist, Dion has an innate knowledge of sports and community projects, from the high-performance elite environment to the grassroots community level. This has been shaped by years of personally interacting with local and international facilities. Since retiring from international hockey in 2005, Dion has successfully combined his two foremost passions, sports and architecture, establishing 106 Architects in 2009, specializing in master planning, design, and delivery of sports-related facilities across Australia and New Zealand. Will you please help me welcome to the stage Mr. Dion Gosling.
Perfect. Thank you, Nikki. How are you all going? Good? Thanks very much, guys. We've had environmental perspective from Tiffany and Simon. Thanks for your insight around the various different scale of facilities that you're involved in. It looks really, really exciting. I think the comment about the inward or outward looking facilities is a really apt one. And what is that aspect of the social piece, which to your question there. So what I'd just like to start off with is just hark back a little bit around that concept of the third place and talking in the pre-drinks area here. Everyone seems to have a bit of a grasp and an understanding of that idea of the third place. So it's this place between home and work that we come to for some social interaction. It's the safe, accessible place that we feel that we can come, we can better ourselves, and we can learn from each other. The idea today is that we have a look and really have a look and see how it can transform just an everyday public space. So the concept really is just about people and place. For those of you who were here earlier, managed to look outside and just survey the land that we have there. It's about place and people, and everyone's really excited about what's going to potentially happen through here, particularly Simon, it seems, who's got a balcony on the second floor. So the proposition that I've been working on over the last probably 7 or 8 years is this idea of third place, and being able to connect the sports and the architecture into how there's an opportunity here for how can our sports facilities be that new third place. So there's a couple of things in that. One is around our sports and community facilities, but it's also about that idea of what is the new third place, or what can that be? So I just want to take you on a journey a little bit about my thoughts around this idea of evolution and transformation in terms of what that might be. And a lot of it is based around our own self, a perspective that we have on ourselves, where we've come from, what makes us tick, both socially and the way that we grew up. So for me, I was brought up in South Auckland, in New Zealand, and then had a lot of my youth around this idea of freedom to explore, this freedom to express ourselves, but also a freedom to be able to play. So I went from South Auckland then to North Auckland. And like any city, there's this dynamic between South Auckland and North Auckland, or the North and South tension that goes on. So I was able to learn a lot in terms of a social connection and a place, going from a traditional to a new age, or a new way of thinking. And taking that through into an international career of hockey, which was over about 12 years. I never had a lot of talent, but I worked hard and was able to just understand a little bit around my environment, but also our role that we have within those teams and within that environment. So that was then. Now, what I like to try and do through that sports and architecture is to try and spend some time thinking about how we might look to connect, and look to connect between people and organisations. That's what really interests me and has drawn me to this idea of where can third place, and where can our sports facilities or our recreation, leisure, community facilities, where can they sit? So in thinking about the idea of third place, it's an archaic term. It was developed in mid-century US largely, but was driven around the pub or the cafe, largely male-orientated spaces. You know, in today's world, this has changed, and I think that there's an opportunity for us to be able to enrich it through our people and place, but also through design, through the architecture. But architecture or design can mean a lot of various things: landscape, planning. So when I come from an architectural point of view, I know there are some planners sitting in here as well. We all have a slightly different view on it. But the idea is that we are designing these places for people to occupy. And with that comes an emotional connection. So harking back to where we've come from and what our viewpoint is, what is your viewpoint? What are the pieces that you're bringing into the thinking and on this concept of third place, and what does that mean to you going forward? I guess we can always come up and say, well, so what? Do we really need this third place? Well, just hearing through here that ability or that drive for organisations to connect, whether it be through a generational connection or Simon saying through a range of literally the fans and the community and the places that we have. If we want to try and engage people, what do we need to be able to change? So moving that on is the slogan that we've started to develop some thinking on, is the third place thinking. So we've taken an old concept, and how can we all transform it through an emotive connection, but also through design, and look to overlay it in the decisions that we're all making, either through council, through some strategic or policy directions, but also on the ground in terms of buildings, field of play. How might we look to design and contribute to that? So the third place thinking, what is that? So one of the themes that we've been thinking about is this idea of what role does our community infrastructure have? And it's crucial, I believe, in being able to create resilient communities. Community infrastructure, that thing which sits between home and work, how can we connect with that, and how does that end up happening with us? So we were involved in some of the work with the rebuild of the Christchurch earthquakes, where there was a devastation of some sporting facilities right across the town. They had undergone quite a bit of work and some strategic understanding of where their facilities might be, and all of a sudden this event gave rise to them to be able to just pause and rethink and just reflect on where they had come from and what were the needs that had been developed in the strategic planning and rollout of their recreation facilities, and how might they look to end up progressing through with that. So there were a couple of different sports or community facilities that were developing at that time. There was a high performance venue, the Metro Sports, and we were involved in more the community side of it. But there was also an aspect to that which overlaid and allowed us to transfer across this idea of multi-sport and sharing and collaboration, and see where that might work across the different codes, but also some really, really interesting dynamics between community-based play, so the day-to-day use of the individual sports and the codes, and what that looks like transferring through some regional, the regional sports bodies, and then up to a national and international event. So we had this really detailed overlay of community and high performance, which I'm really interested on given the background, but also how you oscillate between this day-to-day operation and need based on the grassroots level community, and how that flips into event mode to be able to cater for some international hockey match, for example. So there were some really interesting conversations, and ultimately to try and pull that together. Now, the other part to that is around that social aspect. So Simon talked about the Marvel Stadium and the outward looking and what they can do with the plaza. You know, in this example here, in the master plan that we developed, that was then developed, we worked hard to shift the car away. You know, to get away as sports active people, that need to be able to drive the car up to the pavilion or drive the car up to the sports fields. The collective group decided, no, we're okay to park the car 100 metres, 50 metres away. We can walk. And what that left us to be able to do is establish this idea of a pedestrian boulevard or a plaza or a spine that could also have a multiple range of functions. So it could set up as a day-to-day mustering area so Saturday morning, it just goes bananas with the kids out there and the parents. But also in event mode, it allowed us to set up we could section off areas of that to allow for hospitality or event mechanism or concessionary trucks, food trucks, that type of thing, to try and create that experience and that connection. It wasn't just about a functional requirement to drive a car up to the front gate. So in terms of that social piece, it's been a really super successful piece around how we can look to activate. Now, of course, we've had the Australian bushfires that have occurred over from late 18, 19 through 20, and massive devastation on such a wide range of area. But also part of that is the phenomenal donations and contributions by private and public celebrity people coming through. So there's a real challenge there, I see, for the councils about all that money coming in. You know, strategically, how do we look to roll out, and what do we roll out to meet the needs of those people? So if we think that once we get like the earthquakes, once we get the roof and the shelter and the water running for people, what is the next thing for us to be able to engage and try and create that glue that'll bring the community together? And so I think this is where the role of our community facilities, sports facilities, can come into play. And so one of the projects that we had to look at was, how do we connect the community groups and the sports groups together? Because often there's tension there, isn't there, where you get community groups who are not actually sports people. In fact, a lot of them hate sport. But the ability to be able to try and get a community centre in this particular project placed right in between two fields of play, and still allow the community to come in and engage with the sporting club in another building, allowed us to just be careful about not duplicating space. It also gave us the opportunity to try and draw the community group, the non-sporting community group, bring them in and have them mix and mingle. And actually a lot of the tensions were broken down, because a lot of them were grandparents of the kids anyway who were playing sport. But it took a lot of courage from the council and also in the project group to go, well, you know, here's the chance with the devastation of the old community hall, where can we put it? How do we roll that out? And where can we create the best value for our community? Of course, COVID came along and has presented us with this idea of third place. Now, I don't know, our kids spend a lot of time in their third place, which is the virtual third place. You know, what does this start to think about us in terms of esports and the development of physical hard buildings or facilities? Now, this is going to open up something really interesting for us to be able to look at. So out of that is, what is the future? So it's around that built environment and the community infrastructure, and what sort of role can that have, and how do we look to transform that? What does that look like, and what are the pieces of our community infrastructure? It's certainly this guerrilla building within our parks. Now, certainly through COVID, I know Moonee Valley had some challenges here. The kids want to get out and they want to get a spade and they want to be able to dig their tracks and occupy and create a place for them that they feel safe and that they can occupy. What do we do with that? How do we take part of that? this idea of organised chaos where we design and can develop some play spaces that looks like chaos, but actually if you put kids in there and mixed use in there, it can create a real dynamic environment which people can occupy. The stadia thing, Simon's talked a little bit about that. You know, typically inward-looking facilities, how can we change that, and what is the role for that within our third place? Certainly commercial development offers up a really interesting opportunity for us to be able to really explore just the traditional office space or traditional commercial development and what the role is there. Integrated housing within sporting environments, and the Moonee Valley project here is a really good case in point. We've got some work on the periphery and we've got some work on the infield, but there's also some existing uses and some existing groups there. What are the challenges, but where are the opportunities with the mix and the sharing that can go on to try and get the utilization out of the land space that we've got? Certainly office space, the third place is where we can occupy a little bit of the field of play. Is it an education space? What is the role of our education space within our community facilities? Retail's got a bit. We've got programs which we're rolling out as well with the kids, and community centres we've touched on a little bit. There are a couple of little ingredients that have tipped our way just in terms of understanding the impacts of it and what makes up that third place. So the piece that we're really interested at the moment, what happens at the intersection of sport and the community, and how can that enrich those places that from a design perspective that we're looking to input on. Certainly history, tradition and culture are three really big factors in terms of what that is. And often when you talk with these groups in a multi-code discussion or stakeholder discussion, there's often probably only 2, 3, maybe 4 key areas that a lot of them are really protective about or uncertain about. And it's around history. How has that represented the culture and the tradition? How do you take an identity that's been there for 100 or so years and bring that through into a new development? How does Moonee Valley look to bring the flavour in on a new project? And so from a design perspective, there's some real challenges there, but there are also some opportunities for us as well. So we see the challenge at the moment is around that scalability and intimacy. At least this is what I think. If we can take a look at a range of facilities that we have, so everyone understands their domestic house. Everyone understands the scale of that, the texture of it, the intimacy of it, the smell of it. You feel comfortable and you feel safe. What would happen if we took some of those pieces of that and then look to scale that up? So we scale it up into a community facility, a regional facility, and then into a stadium. Would that not help us all with that ability to be able to want to hang out there more, to connect, to have that as our new third place? I think it can. And so from a designer's point of view, if we can capture some of that residential domestic scale and we can scale that up successfully, then I think we're going to be in a really good position to be able to do it. So a couple of slides, how do we scale for it? How do we design for it? These are some really pressing questions. How do we localize it? Because we can easily develop a third place, let's say in Sydney, and try and replicate there, but it's not going to work. So how do we localize it? How do we overlay the culture and environment that goes on it? What's the impact of it in terms of the surroundings, but also the people? If we're looking to establish built forms that have a 50, 100-year life, what is the impact of that? It's very hard to try and project that forward. What is the best value for it? How do we deliver it? How do we apply it? But ultimately, how do we better connect the community? I think it's a question that we always have when we design. How can we better connect the community with what we're doing? It's not necessarily about the object, but we're designing experiences and we're designing stories, I think is the basis. So that idea of crafting scale and intimacy, we talked earlier about the residential and how we scale that up, and we've talked about the value of the sustainability piece. How can we create that network which can ultimately service the local people? The way that I think there's a way forward in terms of some process. So the way that you traditionally look, and if we look at something like an Olympic Games, which one day I'd like to be able to be involved in a bit on that. Actually, Brisbane's just reasonably successful quite soon, is we start off with this master plan, this broad idea of what that could be. And then we overlay what that event is. So what is something like the Olympics? What is that going to overlay, and what does that look like over the top of our master plan? And then we fashion out our legacy plan. So what happens after that? So the London Olympics, we saw the idea of temporary and permanent structures being broken down or built up depending on capacity day to day, but what is that legacy that goes back? And I'd like to add the idea of the social plan. We need to overlay the social plan over the top of all of that other process to figure out how it will be in terms of a third place and somewhere that we can all occupy. So the question that we've been asked as part of this NGV event has been designing the world that we want, and how can we transform and shape life? You know, I think it's through that idea of subtle evolution and intimacy, and with the ability for us to be able to make a transformation that is really, really, really positive. So the concept is around that idea of the third place. What we're saying is that it's the bringing together of the community facilities that are going to be a key part in terms of the design or the community that we have in there. We've got some evidence around the earthquakes, the bushfires, the events, the tragic events that turn up. We know that there is a need for it, and it needs for us to be able to fashion a way forward that we can do. What I'm really interested in is around that idea, and you'll all have your own stories within that, the subtlety of how that shifts. So as an elite athlete, we were constantly thinking of how can we make these subtle adjustments on how we work and play so that we can be better. And it's the same, I think, with design. How can we make these subtle changes within our communities that will ultimately result in a fantastic experience? So a couple of small things just to leave you on. So how can design evolve? Because that's the other question. How do we design something into the future from where we are now? It's very difficult to project forward. But I think we need to design for who we are. I don't think we need to design for buildings. Like the idea of object building for the sake of an object sitting out there in the middle of the park, I think is an old concept. We need to be able to design who we are. As designers, we certainly have an impact on shaping that environment, and in some ways we can design people through our buildings, but we need to be able to design who we are. Everyone gets to have their say. This idea of consultation is a positive thing, I think. Doing some work with some groups, and I know there's people in here. Dan, you're doing some great, there's some stakeholder management, you know, listening and gathering those ideas off people are really enriching and empowering for the people, but also fantastic for us to be able to get a little bit of insight, because ultimately they're the ones who will have to occupy those buildings long before we're gone. So we're in that time of change, and I think that whole idea around those components and the influences that we all individually have, I think can be tipped into this idea of the third place. And so ultimately for me, it's about, you know, let's design together around this third place. It's not just around, for me as an architect, to design something and expect people to occupy it. It's about gathering everyone in and going, we can actually do this together in collaboration, and we can create these third places that are going to be able to enrich all of us going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dion. Who's got a question for Dion? Got a microphone coming to you right now. There it is.
Thank you. Thank you. Dion, given that all of us here, or most of us here, are Melburnians, and we've endured one of the longest lockdowns in the world during the pandemic, how do you think that experience is going to influence the third place in Melbourne, given that you'd think out of the pandemic, people are very aware of community, very aware of nature. So how do you see that playing out in the future in Melbourne?
I think one of the outcomes that we certainly saw living in Melbourne during lockdown was that idea and identity of community. We certainly became closer to our neighbours, didn't we? At least was our experience. I think the idea of that ability to share, I think, and be a little bit more tolerant to people, I think will play itself out. And what I get a sense of is that in the context of sporting environments, looking at single use sports, looking to maintain, say, or try and get some funding, I think we're going to look a little bit wider and go, we're all in this together. How can multiple groups come in and try and make some improvements? It's been a really interesting time, hasn't it, around that getting to know your neighbours, but also around mobility as well. And I think, and what role is sport playing? What I'm seeing through sport membership and playing is that we value family time more as well. And I think, so no longer do I want to have to commit myself to a Saturday playing hockey. I want to have a bit of flexibility in that. So I think what we'll end up seeing is wider groups or bigger groups being able to kind of, who's available, who's not. No, I'm doing this thing for family, I'm going to join in. So as designers, that changes the spaces that we need to provide for that interaction as well. And I think it strengthens that idea of the third place. We want to create the local club for people to come down and just engage in as a family unit and bring the neighbours down who might not be exposed to that. So I think it might well just open up a bit more visibility across a whole range of different sports or users or people that we might not have seen before.
Anyone else have a question for you? Yep, back there. Which way?
Hey, Dion. Just in relation to that whole concept of the intimacy at home and then trying to upscale that, the intimacy that you feel, an emotional connection with your home is probably something that develops over time. And if you look at it from the point of view, if you were to say, rent a house through Airbnb and go and stay there for a week on holidays, you don't have an intimate connection with that place. It's just a house that you're staying in. And a house is, you don't have that intimate connection with a house until you live there, and it develops that over time. How do you take that concept and upscale that practically into the design of larger spaces for the community?
Yeah, I think, and the social space, let's take this place, for example, the social space is key to that. So if we're designing a social space for 150, 200 people, I think that ability, and that's for, say, a Saturday peak event, the trick is to how can we create that same space for a Monday night, just a couple of people going down and hanging into it. And so we can divide that off and we can create a variance of spaces, but I think that's one technique that you can use. The other part of that is around that history and culture and tradition. How do you display that in a digital world? You know, and you've got multiple sports involved. So a lot of sports groups that we get involved in, they've got, you know, a ton of memorabilia which gets splattered around the place. But if you've got 5 different groups coming in, they all want to put their stuff up. How do you manage that? So I think there's certainly a place for technology in that, but I think the size of those spaces that can be brought up or brought down, different events of the Monday night, really low level night, and the Saturday really high peak night. I think what the surf clubs do it really, really well here in terms of a third place to be able to just go and have a meal and have a beer or a wine or whatever you want to do in a space that you feel comfortable in. So we can dress it up from, you know, furnishings, you know, plants, some interior treatment, but I think it's also a volume thing as well. So if we have a big shed for 200 people, it's a social space. It's going to have a completely different feel to it than a meeting space that has a, you know, relatively low ceiling. So there's probably some tricks here. It's a hard question because we're constantly trying to figure that out. You know, where you're looking to generate facilities that can cater for 200 people, but you don't want to lose sight of, you know, the 5 bowls people who also want to occupy that same space. Does that answer the question? I'm not sure. Hopefully it gives you a bit of insight. Yeah.
Thank you. So hello. So myself PK or
Hi.
Prithviraj Kole. So I just have a question, like you guys are trying to create a social space there, so which is relaxing, comforting, engaging, and attracting more people. So how are you guys like planning to integrate placemaking into this to make people more comfortable in the space? So are you like guys going to consult placemaking organization, or are you guys gonna go through the landscape architects, or what's the process of integrating more people into the space?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I've always felt that the opportunity, it's not just about, say, building a building and then separate from the landscape and separate from the field of play and separate. By nature, we have a boundary that we design in, but I think that, and James will probably talk to this much better than I, it's bigger than the boundary side of things. And I think within a space and with the way that we design, we can certainly offer the ability to be able to visually connect and physically connect to the environment. There's a tendency to have two-story pavilions, for example, because of the view, but what you lose is that connection with the ground. So there's pros and cons around each. The idea with wayfinding, how we come in and enter the site and how you traverse your way through and make your way to a space, and that space is not necessarily a building, but it could be a sideline if you're there to watch sport. So it's about pulling in all the expertise that you can from all over the place and doing it together. So I'm a big believer in joint bids or joint presentation. It's not just about one organisation leading everything. To me, it's gathering in everybody, which says to this, let's do it together, because I certainly don't have all the answers for that. Hi.
Thank you. Management committees or directors of these organisations often seek design because there's a funding opportunity, but they're not necessarily ready to create something as complex as what you're suggesting. So the issue of what you were just saying about bringing different specialities together really is important for board members, I think, because many of them struggle with the concept of sharing. They struggle with an enormous change from owning the football club to suddenly having community spaces. What does it mean? So I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense when you look at what the governance arrangements are and how they tackle that. They're often tackling things well before they're ready to actually deal with it, and designers with really good emotional intelligence, I think, would be a huge benefit for management committees and directors to come to terms with some of the changes that are required to do this.
Yeah, I think to the point about sharing, I think certainly there's a lot of councils and even funding agencies who are getting on board about that idea of sharing and multi-use. And so I think, Simon, you mentioned it's not just about a footy club going, give us 5 million for this, and the council goes, what? It's about saying, well, who else have you got in hand, and where else can the value be? And so I think from a policy and a strategic direction from them, but also the impetus to say, look, you're not going to get any funding unless you join up with somebody else and show some real value, and where are you going within your master plan? What is the overall vision, which is kind of what we're seeing through here. Awesome. Thanks everyone for your questions. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Dion. Okay, before we bring up our next speaker, I would just like to look at the energy in the room and give you all a chance to stand up, stretch out, turn around, say hi to the person next to you, maybe grab another cup of coffee or tea if you need it. All right, let's start to get everybody back to your chairs. Get settled in. We've got 2 more presentations for the day. You're not going to want to miss these. Can I ask someone, what is your favorite takeaway or something that's really stood out to you that you've heard this morning? Outwards? Yeah, the outwards versus inwards? Yeah. Yeah, that really got me too. I'd never really thought of it that way before because when you're inside, you're inside. Yeah. 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 I'm so glad you brought that up. That's fantastic. Yes, because that was something that landed very well with me was changing my thinking about the entertainment and options within the sports stadium. But then the purpose that you're there, you're not just there for that event and then you turn around and go home. Sometimes, but if you've traveled for several hours to get there, why not hang around, go out to dinner, socialize, see some live music? So, yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that multi-purpose space is, we were just talking about that, about how there's so much more, many more opportunities that can be presented when you open up the lens and to a wider aperture. Thank you. All right, without further ado, I'd like to bring up our next speaker for the day, James Mant. Now, James is a passionate urban planner with 20 years of experience, now leading the development and implementation of 20-minute neighborhood policy for the Victorian government. Now, I can't wait to hear about that. That's really exciting. James advocates for walkable, compact places, great design, place-based planning, and community partnerships. And he's also worked on developing Plan Melbourne from 2017 to 2050. I don't know about you, but I can't even think that far ahead. Well, let's let James tell us all about it. Ladies and gentlemen, James Mant.
Thank you. That was a great segue, actually, because there's a few questions there which are going to relate quite closely to what I'm going to be talking about. So I'm not an architect. Sorry, I feel I should apologise. I'm a town planner or a wannabe architect, I think we're called. But what I'll talk about first is I just want to show you how planning and health and sport are linked, and I'm going to take you back first. So when we met as a group, we actually mentioned this place in England called Bourneville, and it's a development that was to support the community around the Cadbury factory, basically for the workers there, and it was really developed around social betterment. So it was around how you look after your workers, how they can get better, better health, concerned about health and fitness. And it really, there's a couple of pictures there, but the top couple of pictures there from the Bourneville proposal, and it included lots of different facilities, including swimming, as well as lidos, fishing, walking tracks. So it was really about embedding that concept of health in planning. And I think what we're seeing now more recently is how important it is to link health and planning. And so that really is just to demonstrate that planning and sport and health is not something new. We've been thinking about this. Humans have been settling places and creating places
for thousands of years, and it's been something that's been considered lots of times before. And are we going in? I guess the question is, are we going in the right direction now? I included a couple of other pictures there. One's from Split in Croatia, down the bottom there. I went there on my honeymoon, and it is absolutely amazing. It's a beautiful place, and it's just really to demonstrate that this is a place for people. You know, it's not a place for cars. You can't see any cars there because you can't drive there pretty much. And it's beautiful, accessible. It has everything you need within a walkable sort of catchment. And even in Australia, like early settlement of Australia, that's in Melbourne, you know, we did have high density sort of development, which was more akin to kind of walkable neighborhoods. And I'm going to talk about the 20-minute neighborhood, but it's really about walkable places that are accessible to the things that you need. But we've had a bit of a, I guess, experiment over the last, you know, 100 years maybe, where, you know, we did all this planning for probably thousands of years, you know, settling, and then all of a sudden the car comes along, and it really has changed the way that we plan, and it has resulted in some poor outcomes, as you can see here. You know, if you lived in the middle of that, I don't think you're going to be walking anywhere because there's actually nowhere to cut through or get to anything. Plus, there's nothing to go to. There's no other facilities. It's monocentric, you know, housing, and you know we've had pressure to develop to have affordable housing, but we're not seeing any affordable living, which is, you know, I guess not just the house itself. It's about your whole life. It's about, you know, keeping things affordable, and the people who live in these types of areas are often, you know, there's a lot of issues around health, and you know the fact that you have to drive everywhere. And I think COVID really, you know, if you think about the 5K rule, we had some serious issues in these types of areas. But there's good news. We're seeing a re-energization of what I call localism, and that is really about connecting to your local place. And as was touched on, you know, COVID has come, and we've had this. We've actually had a bit of a test on 20-minute neighborhoods really in the last year, because we've had during the lockdown we were locked down to 5Ks, as everyone knows, and which is a little bit beyond your 20-minute neighborhood, but it actually really shone a light on places. Have you got the things you need, or haven't you got the things you need within that distance? And I heard a terrible stat the other day, which is apparently there's 7 million trips per day by car in Melbourne that are less than 5 kilometres. So if we can tap into that and change that, then we can really have a big impact on how we live and how sustainable we are. And here's a few examples of places that we're seeing are being reclaimed. So people are wanting to use spaces previously used for driving or cars or parking, and actually having it turning over to places for people. And so we funded one of those projects, and the state government and councils are doing some amazing work across. There's heaps of parklets, and what they call parklets, which are kind of turning a car parking spot into a park across Melbourne, and it's really exciting, I think, and we're seeing a lot of momentum at the moment, which I'm hoping will continue. So what is a 20-minute neighborhood, and how does that fit in? Well, simply speaking, it's about what we're trying to do is talk about something called living locally. Sorry, can you hear me all right? Oh, yeah. So living locally is what it means, and that means, you know, you really have to have the things that you need on a daily basis within a walkable distance from where you live. So that's what we're aiming for. So understand that there's a lot of places that don't have that, but we are actually aiming for that. And I guess this picture here, the features, that's in Plan Melbourne, so that's policy. We have to follow that. You know, councils in their planning schemes, it's state policy. 20-minute neighbours is state policy. So councils are trying to implement this as we speak. And it talks about the types of things that you should expect in your neighbourhood. And I guess linking in what we were talking about today about the third place, the important community anchors. Some of these things are really important in terms of to the community. So, you know, things like schools, they really are a place where people get together, and it's a key anchor in the community. Community facilities, sports facilities, that it's where the community get together. So what we mean is the ability to access what you need within a 20-minute return walk from home. So you can talk, you can understand what I mean there, and with access to safe cycling and public transport. And we've talked a bit today, some other people have mentioned about sustainable development goals as well. And I'm not just doing this as a offside, I've actually got a badge. So that means I'm taking it seriously. But yeah, it's actually embedded into Plan Melbourne. We really, this is actually a real great example of global to local, because it's really about your local neighbourhood, but we really have a line of sight to the UN goals, which are really important to refer to. So yeah, what do we mean by this? So what makes a 20-minute neighbourhood? What are the elements? There's lots of elements. It's very complex. It's actually about places, all the things that make up a place. But yeah, we're talking about third place. Obviously, there's some change in what that third place is. Traditionally, as Dion was saying, it's the place which is not home or work. But now, obviously, you might find people working in cafes like that now, because it's getting mixed. So your third place is a slightly different concept now. But we talk about dense places with compact mixed uses, lots of different things to be able to access to local parks, open space, well connected and safe, has diverse housing, it has a high quality attention to detail in the design. It's high quality public realm. Attention to detail. I really love that photo there in the left-hand corner. It's a very, very simple and cheap initiative where they it's about the placemaking. I think was mentioned in a question. They painted all the bricks, and it's just brought that street, that little pathway to life, and it just shows you that the small things can make a big difference. And then also be connected to public transport, linking to other places. So what we have been doing in DELP is working with local councils. So as was mentioned, I worked on Plan Melbourne, which is the metropolitan strategy for Melbourne till 2050. 20-minute neighbours are a key part of that. But after we released the plan, it was like, well, who's going to be implementing this? It's going to be the development industry, and it's going to be councils. So we went out and talked to several councils, one of which was Moonee Valley, and one of the pilot sites was actually Strathmore, not far from here. And we tested with the community what they believed, what they thought it meant, and what it meant for them in their local community. And we did what was called a community partnership approach. So really upfronting the discussion with the community about what it means. And here's some examples of events that we had. We had Coffee with a Cop. We had Stories of Strathmore down the bottom in the middle, which is a really lovely little project that Moonee Valley did, where they interviewed local people and traders about their life story and why they were in Strathmore, and it was really, really nice. They posted it up around the centre, and it just gave you that real connection to the people who lived there and their stories. So it was really lovely. And there was pop-up consultation. There was a street party, and we tried to sort of consult with the community through other events, because and this one was one which Moonee Valley did, which was a pop-up movie night, and that's a nice example of some of these sporting facilities used for other uses as well. And there was beautiful evening, movie night plus consultation event as well, and using spaces differently. So it's a nice little side thing there. I guess what we wanted to do was, after the pilot, was build on the momentum that we found from the pilot project. And the community was coming back to us and saying, these are the things that we want to see happen. And I was sort of determined to make sure that we were delivering on some of it, and not just walking away, even though we had no budget at the time, so it's a bit risky. But we actually ended up preparing these activation plans for each of the pilot neighbourhoods. And in those, and during the time that we prepared these, COVID hit, and we realised that there was things that we probably need to do to help for the trader recovery, but also to give space to people for social distancing and that kind of thing. So it actually morphed into a bit of a activation plan, but also a sort of COVID recovery as well. And it talks about, these plans talk about, greening, looking for more space for walking and trader space, traffic calming, pop-up parks, cycling facilities, priority walking I mentioned, but also thinking about, well, how do we use our neighbourhoods in the future? Maybe we're going to need spaces for co-working or areas that people can work locally rather than going to maybe the CBD or other places, and also helping the traders themselves through stimulus. So really, it was such great timing that we prepared these. We sort of had an eye for the end of the financial year, and we used these as unashamedly going around to government and trying to find money to pay for some of this. And we did find some money. So another department helped with, a suburban development department helped with funding, and we were able to help councils to deliver some of the projects which were in the activation plans. And here you can see two of them. So on the left is the painted street, that's Sunshine West. That's there right now. I was there last night actually. There's little parklets along the street, and it's quite a vibrant little strip now because of the colours. And it's just really giving that attention to the place and showing that you care. And I heard last night that the traders are really pleased about it, and there's been a lot more activity in the neighbourhood now because of the interventions. And the other one, which is I think actually just been built, that one's in Croydon South, and that's providing another public space. So there's space for seating, there's table tennis, there's little kids play area, connects to the local shopping strip, and there's areas there for performance and things like that, which I know that council are trying to link in with other things that are happening, across the council. So it's really good. So taking it kind of up, I guess, a little bit, this concept, and I think people touched on it a little bit earlier in some of the questions. It's actually a growing concept across the world, and we're in Melbourne. We're seen as leaders on this because we've been working on it for the last few years, and we've really developed the policy really well. So we're getting copied, and Paris, some of you may have heard, Paris is talking about a 15-minute city, which is a very similar concept to us. We've had discussions with Paris, and then there's in the UK, in Scotland, they're really going great guns with it, and they're actually, Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister there, recently announced that 20-minute neighbours are going to be key part of their programme of government, and local place plans as well, and they're investing a lot of money as well. They're putting £275 million into urban renewal to support 20-minute neighbourhoods, and another 500 million for active transport. So there's a lot of stuff happening across the world, which is really encouraging. And I think because of COVID and the situation where people are more local, it's really given it a boost in terms of its importance. So just to really finally quickly, what are we going to do next? So what we're working on at the moment is, in this year, is to really look at tools to help councils deliver this. So one of them being a visualization. So by that I mean showing places change over time so that the community can see what we mean by what is a 20-minute neighbourhood and what's it going to look like. I think people have ideas of it, but actually what does it really look like? So doing that in a Melbourne context as well, because it's easy to point to Split and people go, well, that's not Melbourne, it's never going to work here. So doing it in a Melbourne context is really important, and showing it over time and using that as a tool to consult with the community. And we're also now talking about potentially more flexible planning, adaptable. We're sort of coining this term living plans. It's all sort of theory at the moment, but we're going to be working with councils on that this year, hopefully. But it's about having plans that are fit for purpose and are flexible and adaptable to deal with what is needed now. Often in planning, we do these lengthy structure plans which take 3 years, and then at the end of it, it's approved and everyone's unhappy, and it ends up at VCAT and everyone's arguing, and then you open it and you go, well, this is out of date. So, you know, it doesn't always work too well. So we need to think about new ways of doing things. We also are looking at trying to support best practice, because it's not the government that deliver the development, it's the development industry. So if we can point to best practice and encourage and actually even maybe fast track and help deliver best practice, then that's going to be really important as well. So yeah, just to round it out, I think, you know, the third place, this concept of third place is really key to 20-minute neighbourhoods, and where you are other than home and work is really where, you know, neighbourhoods are that, you know, they contain the facilities that you need on a day-to-day basis, and it is about access and it's about your community connection. So thank you.
Thank you, James. You've just opened my mind to a whole lot of possibilities. How about you guys? Who has questions for James?
James, that was terrific. I work in community leisure facilities and do a lot of work with local government. So it's nice to see that push down of the 20-minute neighbourhood concept really coming down on local government. We're seeing it. But the reality is with a lot of our leisure facilities is we get a real small amount of the community using those facilities. The majority are out in the wider community that aren't accessing it. And so I just want to hear from your perspective, how can you create sustainable, diverse activities that are going to really connect with those that are socially isolated, those marginalised communities that aren't coming out for it? So I can see some great activities that, you know, like there'll be a family that'll go to that one. But how can we get to those communities that aren't necessarily engaging on a regular basis?
It's a great question. It's a very difficult thing to solve, I think. Like, I mean, we tried to do that as part of the pilot in terms of involving and as I said, connecting into different events and activities that normally you wouldn't, and not hear from the same voices all the time, because in planning you tend to hear from the same people with the loudest voices. And you know, you don't get lots of people coming to a strategic planning and listen to strategic planning in the town hall kind of thing, you know, but you're going to get people going to a movie night. So I think that connection is really important. And I'm not an expert on that issue, but I think one of the things that we learned during the pilot was that this is not about planning or community development or economic development. It's about the place, and it's about bringing together those different elements across councils, but also in the community together about the place and that connection that you have. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of what we did in our project. Another one. Didn't answer your question.
No, just one other thing. One thing about COVID-19 is that it has driven an amazing interest in cycling, and it's something that we don't want to leave untapped, I think. So, and I imagine it would have thrown up a nice curveball for the town planning, and how can we harness this renewed or new effort into cycling to connect more with these 20-minute neighbourhoods? What's the thoughts around that?
Yeah, it's a really good point, and we've seen lots of pop-up cycling lanes being put up, and particularly in the city of Melbourne and around there. And I think when we see pop-up cycling lanes, they end up becoming permanent. I think that's really important, you know, because people can see how it works. It gets more people out cycling. I saw a stat the other day in Europe that there'd been a huge percentage increase in cycling just by putting those pop-up lanes in, and it gets that behaviour change, which is really important. So I totally agree. I think Melbourne should be a cycling city. You know, it's relatively flat, but you know, one of the issues is around safety, and about having those segregated lanes is really important.
I think also you look at a lot of people are now working from home. Yes, obviously a lot of organisations, government included, encourage people to come back to work or demanding that they come back into the city or their second place. But a lot of people are working at home, so tapping into that market. So for me, for example, as a mum and as a single mum, I'm a cyclist and was very much so before I had my daughter. Haven't been able to cycle much in the last 7 years, but once COVID, the restrictions lifted, I started back cycling again. So it's creating groups that are, friendly, that are teaching, that are safe, and getting those groups out and moving, which I did a lot of that through that This Girl Can program, getting women active. And so tapping into it from that perspective and asking them to answer going back to the first question you asked, I think it's also about just going back to the community and asking what they want. And so asking those people, how can we engage you in cycling in times now that you have when your children are now in care?
And while we've got the microphone, hey, I was just going to say, think about the first question. How many people here drink coffee, go to a regular coffee place, just for interest's sake? Yeah. I can give you about half an hour on coffee, but I won't. But I go to a place and the coffee's really good, and I've gone to another place and the coffee's really good, and I won't go back there. Because one is inviting and friendly and draws you in, the other one is not. So it's not just about the place, it's about how people are greeted and how they're accepted. And sometimes with that, so those places, how do we get people there? They actually have to feel like they want to be there. So you actually have to make them. I remember one girl at a coffee place, lovely coffee, beautiful built environment. And if she was a young student, probably a bad night or a bad, break with a boyfriend. If she could have thrown a coffee at me, she would have. She put it on, unfortunately, can't throw a cup of coffee too far without spilling it. But she put this in front of me, and I felt like going, excuse me, I know this is your part-time job. I know you've got other things, but if you just practice smiling at people and greeting people, you actually might do very well in the next job. And that's a really important place. It's not just about the built environment, it's about the people environment too. I think that's really important.
My name is Brenda. My question is just so simple. Although it's not about the 20-minute neighborhood, has third place got a place for mobile structure? I mean, mobile homes. So, because most Australians are very mobile and transient.
Thank you. Actually, there's one of the pilot, in fact, it is Moonee Valley, yes. Moonee Valley, as part of the pilot, has spent some of the money that we gave them on it's not a mobile home, but it's actually a mobile, well, they call it, it's a library, but it's actually more of a, I guess, using different technology to work and use as a library as well, and with a pop-up kind of situation where you can, put chairs out and tables, and people can work there with Wi-Fi. So, and that's about activating different places, so they can move that around to different neighborhoods and activate different places. In terms of mobile homes, I haven't thought about that. Let me have time. I'll come back to you in the break.
James, great presentation.
Thanks.
There seems to be an overarching theme about sports stadiums and another overarching theme about permeability. The common thing about sports stadiums is they take up a lot of ground, they have a huge perimeter, and that perimeter is generally not permeable, mainly because we want to keep ticketing clean and safety clean. How does DELP plan to address some of those issues about having these huge circumferences that block off parts of the city, like Flemington Racecourse or Marvel? Are there any strategies about the 20-minute city that could be applied to how sports stadiums kind of integrate with the greater community?
I guess there's plenty of policy there to support it, and 20-minute neighbours is all about permeability. So we encourage councils to take on the policy and to apply it when they're looking at applications, and think about the issues around walkability and accessibility. When they're and you don't want to have big structures that block, whether that be stadiums or roads or rail. We've had the level crossing removal project, which has really opened up made places more permeable. So I think you can apply it to anything, and I think it's important that when things are being assessed locally for applications, that they take that into consideration.
Hi, I really enjoyed your presentation, first of all. But
Thank you.
the post-COVID, I've noticed there's a lot more outdoor dining and in your presentations you showed before. Is this something that's going to be part of a long-term plan for Melbourne, or is this more part of the recovery process from COVID-19?
It's a very good question. I'm not in charge of outdoor dining. I think it's great. So as you would have heard, there was a lot of grants that the government provided. I think it was 100 million for the City of Melbourne and then around 80 something million for the rest of Melbourne. And as you saw in my presentation, there's loads of great examples of streets that are closed off. I know that a lot is usually council led. So state government often provide the funding, but then it's council led. And I know that a lot of councils have actually, and I've done it for my local council, they've put surveys up about, do you want to see this become permanent, and your experience of that place. So I'm hoping that, people will see the benefit, and they've been very successful in my local area. So if people are voting for it to become permanent, then it should. And I think councils are doing it already. I was at Brimbank Council last night, and they were talking about, we were talking about Sunshine West, which has got the temporary, but they were saying about how some of the other centres, they've done that over the last few years, and now it's become permanent. So I think the pop-up and the piloting is such a great way to make it permanent, because people can see the benefit of it.
Like seven, I'll keep it on the table. With COVID, I think we've been seeing a lot of what Tiffany just said before, a lot of remote access. So we've been pushing people out of the CBD to country areas. A lot of this seems to be focused on metropolitan or inner city or CBD type of living. Is there a focus on developing this out to the regional areas, given that the push is for people to move out?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, like 20-minute neighbours is a metropolitan policy, applies to Metro Melbourne, but equally, the idea of, I guess, decentralisation is the same. I guess what we're seeing is a change in the way we think about the city, because it has been very CBD focused, and we've got all the rail lines going into the CBD and filtering people in. I think, it's important that we support the recovery of the CBD and rethink it, but it's an opportunity as well to not waste those benefits that we're seeing through COVID, where people are living more locally or choosing to live perhaps in regional areas or other parts of Melbourne. So we don't want to lose that opportunity to enable people to be in those local areas some of the time as well. So yeah, I think it's a good point.
Thanks for your presentation, James.
No
I'm a resident of Richmond. I'd be tipping that we possibly might already be a 20-minute neighbourhood. Are there any in Melbourne currently? If not, what would be the first 20-minute neighbourhood?
It's a very good question, actually. We're sort of trying to work that out, because it's not an easy answer, but I would say that most of the inner areas like Richmond are already 20-minute neighbours. It doesn't mean that they work perfectly. There's issues that need to be resolved in those areas, as any place. But in terms of population, facilities, and access, it's pretty much there. I mean, our focus hasn't been the inner city, so we sort of go, okay, that's one thing, but the middle part of Melbourne, which is sort of 1950s sort of neighbourhoods, that's where we did the pilots, and the greenfield. Those are where the bigger challenges are. So that's been where our focus has been.
I think it'd also be good, though, to champion some of the 20-minute inner neighbourhoods anyway, particularly given the planning minister he's the member for Richmond as well. And I think in terms of encouraging that collaboration between all levels of government to really make this happen and have some exemplar neighbourhoods that fit that criteria would help the cause.
Absolutely. No, I agree with that. And it is about that collaboration across all levels. That's really important, because we do have so many players in this space, and it is complex because so many things make up a place. You've got different parts of government that are potentially doing something which is contrary to what you're trying to achieve. So it's getting people behind that vision, not just in local government, but across local government, within the councils, and also across state government, which is where we come in. We try and facilitate that
So back to your Plan Melbourne, is there a scorecard or checklist around where neighbourhoods are tracking across the the icons and things you showed on an earlier slide, where there might be some obvious gaps around schools or sporting facilities and things like that in some of those potential 20-minute neighbourhoods?
Yeah, there's actually another action that we need to address, which is called a neighbourhood index, which I think is what you're talking about. And it's a lot of work and it's quite complex, but we are doing work on it at the moment. We're looking at existing neighbourhoods and seeing where the gaps are. So I'm hoping we'll be able to make that public at some point. But yeah, it's once you start drilling down, there's a lot of questions that get raised, like how far would you walk to something? Then when you look at actual places, we looked at the walkable catchments in the pilot neighbourhoods, and actually when you start looking at that, it becomes complex as well about directness, shade, topography, all these things. So yeah, we're doing it, but it's not out yet.
Thanks.
Watch this space.
Thank you very much. If there's any other questions, you will have an opportunity at the end to ask any of the panelists questions. Thank you so much. All right, and we have one last fantastic speaker for you. No, we did not save the best for last. Don't you're all good. But I would like to introduce you to Mr. Martin Shepherd. Now, there he is. So Martin has been in the sports and recreation industry for 35 years, both in the UK and Australia. Managing facilities, parks, and open space, museums, and leisure services has provided him with insights to planning and facilities that are practical and realistic. Martin has in recent years specialized in using synthetic sports surfaces and is recognized as being one of the predominant advisors on surfaces in the world. Martin is co-founder of Australia's largest community sport and recreation conference, the National Sports Convention, with a single aim to encourage more people to be active more and in more places. Please help me welcome Martin Shepherd.
Okay, good morning, I think. No, good afternoon, everyone. I have actually been in the industry just over 40 years, unfortunately, but it feels like a brand new day every day. And if you find a job like that, it's not too bad. I started off managing sports and leisure facilities in the UK, and then went up the chain, and then they gave me all the arts and the museums, and then they had another reorganization, and I got all the parks and open spaces. And the one thing I learned from that was just how common the trend was to try and activate people and get people working together. So what our roles were then was really to join the dots. And the role I have now is I've got a consultancy practice where we do leisure planning and the synthetic surfaces. We've got the sports conference where we try to introduce health, wellness, planning, policymakers, advocates together to actually have a better outcome for the community. And then I sit on a couple of technology boards where we try to use data to make decisions based on planning, so that it's actually policy driven and connecting all of the dots again. So to look at the third place, really I'm not coming from an architect's side of view, but I am going to look at a practical and a management side. So really the community has been, the commonality of what we've heard so far has been around living locally, doing it in a sustainable manner, and having a purpose of connection between everything. Third places can be between work, home, and what else we do. History shows, in terms of what James has put up, in terms of what happened 175 years ago in the UK. And it really started in this one place, which is actually Lever Brothers and Port Sunlight in the UK. It's in the northwest of the country, just opposite Liverpool. And it's actually a soap factory. And it started off with a guy called Lord Leverhulme, who actually wanted to sweat his assets. So what he decided to do is not sweat the people, but sweat the assets. So he developed a program where people work for 6 hours a day maximum. And if you look at these conditions, you can understand why. And they had 2 shifts. And then what they did was they actually looked at building an environment around them that made people feel good. So they walked out of that and the family felt good and where they lived. So they built villages around it. And the UK culture is actually about having a pub or a place to go to. So it's really about the men, unfortunately, in those days, actually going around to the pubs and had somewhere to go and to visit. And as time got on, that thinking evolved. So they introduced culture. So culture in those days was a bit different from today. So their culture included things like art galleries and museums, which is on the far side. And then they started to build shops so everybody could walk within a distance. So when they developed this area called Put Sunlight, they developed it so you could walk into particular areas. But just have a look at how much greenery there is there. So they acknowledged in the 1850s to have a community that felt good, had the energy. They really had to work on providing them with the open space and what was needed. And this was the amount of open space. If you can imagine that around City Road or in South Bank in terms of the amount of apartments going upwards, but how much is actually being done in terms of where people can spend their time outside of the work environment. So that they used this model and he then took it over to the US and it wasn't accepted because people said you can't run a business if you're only asking people to work 6 hours a day. And if you're only asking them to work half a day and the rest of the time they can have to themselves. So it just didn't fit in. The second example from the early 1800s is actually Swindon. That's in the southwest of the country. So they were famous for building old steam trains and then steam trains into the electric trains. And they had a huge factory there building the locomotives called the GWR Railway. And what they did was they recognized that there was a linkage between people coming to work on time, being more productive with how they actually live their lives. So they decided to actually start building a village for people to live in, which is the far one on my left. And I had the pleasure when I was in Swindon, working in the council there to manage all of this. And they also moved into culture. So this was what was called the Mechanics Institute. So really it was a combination of a library, performance space, and a theatre, so that everybody could actually go to that. They then evolved from there and actually started developing swimming pools. So in those days, swimming pools were different from today. So in those days, they predominantly had 3 pools, a bit like Melbourne City Baths. They had a long pool, which in UK terms was a 33-metre pool. And in that, that was where the public went to basically to wash and to have a bit of fun. It wasn't much more than that. They then had about a 17-metre pool, which is about half the size, which actually had lockers around us, if you like, where you could get changed. So that was for the working class or the lower middle class. And then he actually had some private baths where you could actually go into one room with one person and actually have a proper bath. So they actually developed that to actually keep people healthy and safe and to start the recreation. The other older building to the side of it was actually an old hospital. So this was a commercial company that built the hospital because there were so many accidents in the railway works. So they built this for 8 people. That's all they could cope with. And they had a garden out front to try and reclimatize people once they were getting better. This model was actually used by Bevan from the Labour Party to actually develop the NHS over in the UK. So Swindon was really quite famous for that. And then over and above that, they built schools and they actually built parks because they understood the value of the place outside work and outside the home. They didn't call it a third place then. It was just what was needed to keep people balanced and keep them happy. If we then move to present day, we've actually got the interaction of people where they gather and interact, whether that be at work or at home. And what we're seeing now in the workplace with the co-offices is we're seeing places where people can relax, they can work in them in relaxing places. What's happening there is, I think we're saying and have seen that if people are relaxed and they feel good, they'll be more productive in what they're doing. So people are building this in to make it more productive for what people are up to. The universities are also looking at what's needed for third places. And what we're seeing here is actually places like the University of Canberra, where they're looking at the whole well-being of the community. And in essence, most of these are in gated communities. The world governing body is actually called FISU, so Federation of International Sports Unions. And what they're doing now is looking at healthy campuses. So what's needed for people who study there or work there, to live there, and how do they actually recreate to have the balance in their life? So they've now got healthy campuses, and there are about 50 of them around the globe. And I think there's 2 of them now in Australia. So it's really not even a 20-minute city, it's really a 10-minute city actually within the campus. And then what we also have is local villages, which James spoke about. And even a lot of the councils are now trying to partition, if you like, part of the municipality into little villages so people feel connected to them. We then have leisure places or palaces. And if you look at Canada, they've been doing this since the 1970s, where what we have is a shopping centre, a leisure centre, community centre, all in one area. And they've really been successful over there on that. But we've also had a lot of success historically within Australia, where we actually have community sports venues as opposed to the marvels, where we integrate sport, the community, and the social side. So a lot of the clubs, and this is one from Benalla, where a lot of the clubs would have on a Monday night one particular cohort, and then they would stay there and they would have an evening meal, or the parents would come down and they'd all join together and have an evening meal. So there's a purpose for going. So it's more than just a sport. And then what we're finding in a lot of those country towns is that the alumni, if you like, of the clubs go back and they have the men's sheds next door to them, etc., or the walking groups. So it really becomes a place where people go. When it's not being used for sport, and in the springs, we normally find that they're used as the showgrounds. So again, it's a place being used for many different aspects. We also have the community leisure hubs, where we're now starting to see health, community services, sport, fitness, recreation, and passive leisure all being put together. Australia, to be honest, is 30 to 40 years behind what's going on in Canada, Europe, and the UK. We actually developed facilities like this in the mid-80s, and we went away from building a $1 million visit centres to actually community hubs that were used for community services, childcare, yoga, everything like that, as well as a bit of sport. So it's good to see that Australia's now coming along with that. But we also have over here the urbanisation of sport and exercise for particular cohorts, where this is actually taken from France as an example, between really quite a cultural area where they're putting in acrylic courts to actually encourage young people to go along. And we've seen that also in Melbourne around the CBD, where you've got the universities structured here. But people are using a little bit more imagination now to look at how you can integrate traditional sports that aren't used by a lot of organizations or people with community use. So we've got one here from Copenhagen. So this is a traditional 400-meter athletics track, and I'm actually an athletics coach, so I'm quite passionate about the sport. For God's sake, though, nobody uses rubber tracks except the athletics club. So let's make them a little bit more appealing, both to joggers and runners, other sports, and also different cohorts of the community. Because if they're going to use it and become active, we may actually get something that's used, as opposed to spending $2.5 to $3 million gets used of a night time for 2 hours a day. Nothing against athletes, being a coach. But what it does have is the imagination allows it to be used for elite sport, And Copenhagen University is actually, it comes out of an equivalent to the VIS, and it's used by the community. And it's used by young people and by old people. And the older people use it for balance, because there's a lot of research done years ago in Norway that if you actually take people and understand what their problems are, you can develop programs to help them. So over in Norway, they actually worked with the equivalent of our AIS and developed a program with the Winter Institute. And what they did is they set up a obstacle course that went round in a circle. And the first time older people did it, I think the older people were over 65. It took them nearly 10 minutes to do it. After 2 months, they were doing it in under 3 minutes. That gave them the confidence and the balance, and it reduced over 2 years the number of accidents and falls that they had in their own homes. And I think what that does is it shows how health, when health comes to the party and talk with sport, or recreation and physical activity, you can actually have an outcome which is beneficial to the community. As opposed to sport going to health and saying, we're your panacea and this is what we can do. So think about the place and the third place of how we can look at sport being a vehicle for health goals and health outcomes. And we've done this in a number of ways. We've looked at the sustainable development goals, and then we've looked at how that can be used within particular sports facilities. So we've looked at these 8 goals. And from there, we've actually developed a sports concept around the smart sky sports facility. So it's on 4 levels using synthetic technology. What we have on the bottom is a fitness center or a car park, so it generates ongoing revenue. So it's about 8,500 square meters. And then we can put a skateboard park and everything in there. On the first story, we would have 8 five-a-side pitches, which again is a great revenue generator. And then we have 2 half fields that can be used for touch rugby and five-a-side. So the height of the roof is linked to the sport. And then on the top, we actually have an open fenced area, which allows us to then use that for football or any of the rugby codes. So what we can do there is integrate it within a town centre. We can integrate it within a parkland, and we can actually have it so something where all generations can come and use it, which again brings that third place together for the whole family and for all generations. So in terms of what we can learn from the concept of third place and what we've heard today is that it's a place to feel connected, both physically, emotionally, and socially. It's a destination which is easy to access. It has to be local, preferably by walking or cycling, and if necessary, by vehicles. I always find it really ironic that when we build sports facilities, people want the cars next to the sports facilities, so they only have to walk 2 meters. Let's put them out on the side and let's start getting this thoroughfare where people can congregate and walk and feel safe and a place they want to go. It's really about integrating many parts of someone's interests, social, fitness, family, etc. And therefore should connect with people's different needs, whether that be social and eating, exercise, health, about re-energizing. And that's what I think we need to look at when it comes to the third place. So the design strategy really needs to be targeted, understand the cohorts, because a third place for one cohort may actually be very different from another cohort. And we need to just recognize that. And also the life stages. So people will have different expectations depending on whether you're young or whether you're old or very old. And we need to be able to build that in. And sometimes third place isn't about a whole village or a whole town. It could be a closed community like aged care and everything we've heard through COVID. If we actually have better aged care with a third place in there, maybe we'd actually be much better. So that's it from me, just to wrap up what we've heard so far. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin, and all the other presenters. It's been a very informative session. This is one for you and possibly for everyone else, because everyone's touched on it to some extent, that the idea of the third space and trying to accommodate as many different people as you can, each with their own set of wants and desires. How do you best balance that when you're putting together each of these facilities and accept that possibly some of the people and their wants and needs won't be serviced at all by the facilities that you provide?
That's a really good question. When we do feasibility studies and designs for new facilities, we normally try and start not at the facility, but actually start with the people that you're trying to encourage, activate, whatever, and then work backwards from them and understand what their barriers are or what their activators are. If you understand what their activators are, you can then work out what's the best place for them. If you start at the other end, and I've done a fair bit of work, and there's other consultants in the room, where we get called in by local governments and they say, can you do a business case for this leisure centre? We want a 50-metre pool and we want this, this and this. I'm not sure that's the right way of doing it. I think if you start at the people, understand their barriers, their activators, then go to the place, and then you can decide who actually is the best people to organise it and deliver on it.
All right, Martin, thank you very much. Once again, a big hand for Martin and for all of our panelists. Now, at this time, I would like to turn back over to our principal architect, Dion Gosling, for some final ceremonies.
Thanks, guys. We appreciate it. It's been a long morning / afternoon for you. Just a couple of closing comments. Hopefully, we've started to just engage or create a common language now for us to be able to all go forward, and hopefully it's challenged all of us. I've certainly picked up a whole lot of stuff off these guys. So a little bit of inspiration. But before we go, just a couple of thank yous. So obviously to the panelists, thanks guys for your time. This journey started for us 18 months ago. We were literally the week before shutdown and Melbourne Design Week, and everything got put off until now. So a lot of these guys have been with us through that whole time, and so that's fantastic. Nikki, thank you very much for your help leading us through the way. Good luck with your book sale. You've got an incredible story and journey to tell. Simon's waving that around. A big thank you to Annie. We're over there. Super job. She's kind of pulled all of this together in the background and worked tirelessly and ran the microphone all the way across the floor to everyone. Your strength is awesome. Thanks. Annie runs all of our social media and events with stuff. So if you need some of that stuff organised, that's the girl to go to. Special thanks to PLA. Richard, thanks, and Pamela for your support. We were the recipients of Greg Maddock Grant 2019 that we received that. So we've finally been able to deliver you guys an event. I hope you've really enjoyed that. To the Moonee Valley Racing Club here, Jake and the AV guys, thank you. I know we've run a bit over time, but really appreciate it. It's so good to get a live event happening again. So gets me on to you guys. Thanks for turning up, and to all the virtual registrants that we've had and everyone listening to it. It's really great to be able to just put an event on that can bring people together, and we can just keep a conversation going in the space. Everyone's got such a rich thought process to bring into this sport and recreation community facilities, whether you're a artificial turf contractor or a recreational planner or council. It's just good to create this platform for third place thinking and a new language, hopefully, that can just see us kicking goals into the future. So thanks very much, everyone. Really appreciate it. Drive safe, have a good Easter, and please feel free to hang around and open up the conversation later if you feel like it. Thanks again. Nice one.